Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Swadner, and I'm the exhibition curator for Promega Corporation. And thank you all for coming. This is another celebration of creativity. And I really want to say thanks to everybody that's here and also everybody at Promega. It's pretty amazing what Promega is supporting this and many other things in the arts and science in the community. And in particular to my friend Bill Linton. And also there are quite a few people that are pretty important here, and Penny Patterson and Nicole Hasselwander and Kate Salter, and Fitchburg Star is here. Fitchburg Access is here filming this in the back there, so we're glad that we get to work with them, and you'll be able to see this symposium online eventually on our website. And also in particular to Stephanie Shea, who I guess it's been 5 years we've been working together, and she has really taken this on, the symposium in particular, and the whole arts program to make it such a better product than I ever did on my own. So I'm really grateful for Stephanie for that. So thanks, Stephanie. And so we have also, this exhibition is about partners. And so that's really what we all have. I just, talk about all these important people that we partner with and we've collaborated with through the years. And also we have more on the same thing coming up this next summer. We are going to be working on the summer exhibition will be in conjunction with Steve Leverance and the Agora Art Fair. So we'll have some of the artists involved in that and some music. They're different dates, 2 different events, but we are collaborating with them to kind of bridge that within the Fitchburg community here. So I hope you'll join us it'll be June 9th, we'll be here, and then the August 15th is the Agora Art Fair. So those are both events that you're welcome to join us in celebration. So in the fall, we're going to be presenting the photography of Barry Goldwater. And as many of you know, that I live in Arizona, and when I moved to Arizona, I really started to realize and understand who this guy was. I was growing up in an Irish Catholic Midwestern home, and Barry Goldwater was kind of the devil in our realm. And to move to Arizona and really understand who this guy was as a photographer, and so this is what this is focusing on. And so I'm really pretty proud of being involved in that. And we have here for a couple of days, Allison Goldwater is joining us, and I think she made it back. Is Allison here? Somewhere. She will be here. What? Oh, she's way in the back. Okay. So I hope you'll give a warm Midwestern welcome to Allison Goldwater. She is Barry's granddaughter, and so I met her through the work I did with Pedro Guerrero, which you'll remember that show of Frank Lloyd Wright's photographer, and it was through that work with the Guerreros that I ended up connecting with the Goldwaters. So I'm pretty, I get kind of chills that I get to do this historical thing involving what is now my new home in Arizona. So I hope you'll come out for that in September, and we hope to collaborate with some other people in the community. We have quite a few things we'd like to do outside of what we're doing at Promega. So I hope you'll join. 15th of September is our reception date for that one, so you can mark that in your calendars. But anyway, getting back to what we're doing here, this is about partners, and this involves 3 couples who are partners in life and partners in art. And so I'm going to also, another partner, although Tim and I aren't married, he has been really also instrumental in helping with curating and installation of art and contacts, and been really, like with Stephanie, to bring everything to a nice level. So Tim is going to moderate the talk tonight with the artists, so I will let him explain the rest from here. So Tim Rooney, thank you.
Well, welcome to this afternoon's presidential debate, and these are your final candidates who are each going to have 15 minutes to give us their plan for America. When he said moderator, I see this presidential-looking group, and I had to jump into that. But Daniel, it really has been nice working with Daniel for the last 5 years. We do make a good team. This is kind of like an art form in itself, putting together the collections, because we get a lot of art dropped off, and you look at the scale and the size, and the colors and texture, and you start laying it down. It's like putting a puzzle together, or like problem solving and reacting like a painting. And somehow it all turns into this fantastic art showcase that we get to put on for you all. And a big part of it is because we have fantastic artists that come here. Also, the facility that Promega has to showcase artists like this. And I also want to give hats off to Daniel for 25 years now. He's been putting these showcases together for us. So let's. And he doesn't know that he's only halfway there. There's 25 more years, so you're halfway there, buddy. So, but I have really, really enjoyed it. And I have an art partner myself. My wife and I met in art school in Milwaukee like 38 years ago. And flash forward to today, our kids are graduated and out of the house, and we've turned one of their bedrooms into a makeshift painting studio that we sit side by side and create art. And we don't really collaborate, but we spend a lot of time in there critiquing each other, and it's a living hell. But so I'll be interesting to see how this goes with these guys. But in general, we do encourage and inspire each other. We don't really work on anything together, but it's a lot of fun. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first couple, but I want to read a little bio for each one, and they're going to come up one couple at a time. And I know I might wave to them like 3 or 4 more minutes, because we want to give at least 15 minutes for each couple. And it's funny when you ask artists, they always say like, I don't really like to talk about my work. And then like 2 hours later, you're like, could you please sit down? So we're going to try and keep control of that today. So I'm pleased the first couple are a couple that I've known for 25 years, and I've got to see firsthand their work evolve and them inspire each other. So I want to tell you a little bit about Andy and Annette. Annette's current artistic endeavor focuses on photography and ceramics. Her photography draws the viewer into an up-close confrontation with a subject matter, whether it's a beautiful, delicate plant or a piece of trash on the sidewalk. Her imagery forces the viewer to see the beauty in everyday objects that one might walk right past. Her ceramics are loosely based on mid-century modern vessels with soothing earth tone colors and vibrant glazes. Andy, after studying in Detroit, he worked as a master printer at Gemini in Los Angeles and printed blue chip artists like Ellsworth Kelly and some of the bigwigs. Then he came to Madison in the early 80s to work for UW Tandem Press for the past 25 years. And he still works at the UW teaching printmaking classes at the UW. Rubin's recent interest has been in illustrating history and time as it reflects our own lives and cultures. Rubin manipulates and prints over historical images, sometimes adding collage elements, as well as painting on shaped wood forms that he creates to relate to the subject matters. Please join me in welcoming Anette Hansen and Andy Rubin.
Thank you, Tim. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming today. I'd like to thank Daniel and Tim and Stephanie for all their hard work, and especially I'd like to thank Promega for this great opportunity. It was a really good opportunity for me and a good motivator for me to get more work done and to get photographs actually printed on paper, because like a lot of people today, a lot of my photographs exist digitally on the internet. Already as a child, I was always creating things with my hands, whether it was drawing, doing arts and crafts, or building a treehouse. I naturally gravitated towards art classes in college, where I explored a variety of mediums, but settled on photography, I think, because it gave me access to the outdoors and to connecting with nature and the world around me, capturing visual relationships through texture, form, and light. After a few years of teaching art in Texas and a couple more at a graphics art studio in Copenhagen, I returned to the US to get my MFA here in Madison. At UW, I explored photography with various print mediums, as well as in handmade books. This was all before the digital age. It was during this time that I met Andy through Tandem Press. Our lives are infused with art. We were always doing creative projects with our kids. Our idea of fun is going to art events, looking at art at museums and galleries, or a good flea market. Often dragging our kids along. Many of our friends are artists or art enthusiasts as well. Much like a musician might jam with other musicians or prioritize going to a concert, we seek out art. Though I haven't always had a consistent art practice, I have taught kids art classes. I've organized art events and been an assistant to other artists. I've continued to photograph near and far, often stopping to capture an image and then running to catch up to those I'm walking with. One of my ongoing projects included in this show is photographing trash that is exposed along the curb as the snow thaws each spring, just about this time of year, and usually just on a walk around the block or a couple of blocks. This image was taken just a week ago. Most of the images in the trash installation you will see out in the show upstairs are just from a single walk around a couple of blocks. I'm always dismayed that people can't be bothered to walk the extra few steps to put the trash in the trash can. And you may very well find me picking up other people's trash if you see me walking around Madison. I have a lot of interests, and with my various day jobs, because I am a working stiff, there are never enough hours in the day to do everything I like. A couple of times I've been given the incredible gift to be able to go along with Andy to a place called Penland School of Arts and Crafts in North Carolina. It's an adult art school, sort of an adult camp of sorts. And while he teaches, I get to take a class for 2 weeks, and all I do is make art 24/7. It's the best vacation ever. No cooking, no cleaning, no shopping. The first class I took there was in ceramics, which got me hooked. Different from photography, I enjoy the tactile directness of working with clay. It seems like a natural extension of my massage practice and also my gardening. I like to get my hands in the dirt. And here I'm massaging clay. The more I learn, the more there is to learn. And as you'll see in the show, I like to play with different forms. It has become my favorite winter activity, and I enjoy being part of a supportive makers community called Midwest Clay Project Studios, where I am a member. Art and design inform about everything I do, and I suppose everything I do also informs my art. Whether it's gardening, or cooking, dog sitting, or a walk in the woods. Andy and I met through art, and as partners, we have enjoyed 25 years of art exploration. Art enriches our lives, and I hope it enriches yours too.
Wow, thank you. Tim always said that I was one of those artists that can talk to you guys all day, and that's because, as most artists do, things come in waves. You remember something, and as you're telling a story, you remember the other story, but that story's longer. But you got to finish the first story before you can get to the second story. So I wrote it down. So I do not have a copy of this book out in the lobby for you to buy. This is the Aspirin Book of Printmaking, and it's my sort of joke
to the hard work and brain tease that goes into all that stuff. And after a long time of making art for other people, 27 years at Tandem Press, I worked about a year and a half at Gemini GEL, and then another couple of years somewhere else that totals about 30 years. I turned the page and concentrated on my own artistic output. After leaving Tandem Press, I was employed in Bloomington at Indiana University. And because I was commuting back and forth every other weekend, I had tons of time and no social life. So I spent almost every night in the studio either making monoprints, doing paintings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, coming up with a huge, huge body of work. Inspired by the used books that I collect of images, maps, and scientific journals, the Lilly Library, which is a true treasure, had a wonderful brochure about scientific contemporaries of Galileo. So I started to depict what I thought were humorous images of the work inspired by these esteemed minds. So this is a diagram of a rock, the title being probably more funny than the piece. Anatomy of a cloud, chromatic aberration, dawn wind over Mount Gassendi, and Waller's observation tower. Most of those are in the show here. Waller studied how rain clouds generate electrical energy. So in his piece, you see his tower, like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, so that he could get at the height of a cloud and watch it kind of act. He was studying thunder and lightning. Gassendi was the first European scientist to study aurora borealis, which the native tribes called the dawn wind. And of course, we call it the northern lights. That's also in the show. Another main theme of my work over the last 5 years has been environmental landscapes and our influences and consequences concerning the environment. Factories and pollution, cityscapes, as well as pristine wilderness were depicted. That's the one. So we do collaborate in a certain sense. Oh boy, I'm in so much trouble now. I'll say something nice and she'll go, your paintings are getting really dark and gloomy and all this pollution and oh my God, it's so depressing. So I counteracted that by just throwing away all my blacks and trying to just paint those same images in the most bright colors that I could, which is kind of how some of that stuff comes about. There's a collaboration for you. So the landscapes were becoming geometric in nature, and soon clouds were diagrams or cubism. Building blocks were either landlocked or floating as rock formations. Factories or clouds were interchangeable. Soon titles reflected the humor and the human folly, such as this one's called Conversations About Gravity, hinting that maybe we don't know as much as we do about nature. A humorous reference to Magritte in that a painting of a floating rock is still just a painting. The last series I'm going to show is imagery that I responded to directly from some of my collections of old books and maps, whether Byzantine tiled murals, seashell collections, which you'll see in the show, or a pamphlet of Roman sculptures printed for the Louvre in 1938. And I have either painted or printed over the original offset lithographs to create a body of work that is probably the most personal I've done in a while, historic and maybe even romantic, I'm not sure. These diptych images are about the past, the human condition, how we perceive history, receive history, and interpret history through our own eyes in the modern world. Is that my last? Ooh, one more. Love in balance, or love in balance. That's my last slide. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me and my wife. Got a question? That's a record for me.
I'm glad that's on tape. No, thanks. And actually, that gives me enough time to bring up a little plug for you and Annette, too. Just so you guys know, most of the work in the exhibition is for sale. And artists always rely on sales. So most of these artists also can be found at Abel Contemporary Gallery in Stoughton. So visit that if you haven't as well. Tonight, Andy and Annette, these pieces that are up on the walls have to stay up for the 3 months of the show till June 1st. if you purchase something. But if you want to go home with something, there is a table out there, and Annette and Andy have some ceramics and small prints for sale that you can take home with you as well. So our next couple, Cynthia Quinn and John Ribble, are accomplished Wisconsin artists who have an extensive career as graphic artists, designers, and instructors. Cynthia owned a graphic design business for several years, and John was an instructor in the graphic design and illustration program at Madison College for the past 32 years. Quinn began experimenting with textiles and hand embroidery using whimsical texture, embroidery threads, beads, and hand-dyed fabrics. Quinn states, "I don't intend to leave drawing and painting behind, but I feel hand stitchery is very akin to drawing, mark making, but with thread. I've also found ways to incorporate paintings into my pieces." And while teaching at Madison College, John Ribble was lured into the world of landscape painting by a colleague, and collectively went on many plein air adventures into the western and southern Dane County and beyond. Ribble began painting his plein air landscapes in oil, but transitioned into pastels and staying with that medium ever since, working extensively in plein air for the past 25 years. Please join me in welcoming Cynthia Quinn and John Ribble.
Hello, everyone. Many thanks to Promega and the installation team for putting this work together for our three couples.
You guys did a great job.
Yeah. And we're very excited to be here, included with the other couples. John and I thought we'd just talk briefly about kind of our 40 years of collaboration. We met as graphic designers at a job and became fast friends. And I think one of our biggest attractions to each other was our sense of humor.
Which was necessary because we were working in a corporate environment.
Right.
No offense to our hosts.
It was a different kind of corporate.
It was very different. It was very
completely
different. Yes.
So, that friendship continued on until it became a more serious relationship. And that happened because John left the company, and I thought, oh my gosh, I probably will hardly ever see him. And so that led me to think some other things. Eventually, he became an instructor at MATC. And why don't you talk about that?
Okay. Well, yes, we were both designers and had a love for that kind of work and sensibility. I was also doing illustration on the side, and as were you, I think, from time to time.
A little bit.
Yeah.
More you than me.
But it was, yes, I mean, we were both refugees in that environment, and so created a great bond. And we found out that we were both very much invested in doing artwork of any kind. And I worked as a designer for about a dozen years, basically having found out that a bachelor's in fine arts was not an employable degree. And so I worked, in the commercial field, basically, and then was able to make a transition into teaching, where I thought I would probably pick up on some good communication skills, and then go back, into graphic design. But alas, after being in teaching for a little while, I found that it was an amazing amazing, inspiration to me as an artist, as someone who really enjoyed the interactions with my colleagues and with students. Just kind of a never-ending flow of energy and inspiration. I became a much better artist being a teacher, actually, quite frankly.
So when John started at MATC, he was hired, I think, about a week before classes started, and he had a full load.
That would be after classes started. Yes.
Oh, yeah, right, after.
Yeah.
And he had a full load, and we would carpool. We were living just outside of Madison, and I would go to my design job near the airport, and we'd ride together, and we'd brainstorm all the way in about what he was going to teach when he got there.
Mr. Preparation.
What kind of project could you be doing? And we'd try to come up with this, idea together. And
yes, little did she know she married the poster child for ADD, actually.
But that was sort of our first collaboration as a couple, was trying to get him up to speed at school. And of course, he took off and did really well and taught there for 32 years.
Indeed.
While I continued in design. But I was starting to get a little burned out, and I really wanted to work on my own art. At that time, I had no idea what it would be. And I started teaching part-time at MATC in the design department because I knew everything. I knew all the curriculum, especially his. And so I became a part-time teacher, and John let me share his desk because they don't give part-time teachers anything. And I knew the students, I knew all the other instructors, and it was really fun for me to kind of join in that process with John. And in the meantime, I was learning about drawing and painting better, and totally interested in watercolor. So I started making my own work, of which I'll show a little. So we were overlapping on teaching. I was moving into fine art. John was teaching with a pretty hefty load. And then he got interested in doing fine art. And pick up where...
Well, which was, basically my roots. I went through school in fine arts, loved it, and was, sort of distracted by graphic design and making a living, and was very happy to come back to it. I worked at MATC with a colleague, Chris Gargan. I don't know if any of you guys know him. Fantastic, energetic person who was very invested in the arts as well as in, academics, in doing a good job teaching there. And Chris had gone out and done plein air painting earlier, but decided to, kind of restart the engines years ago. And I was, curious and interested in joining him. We had a great camaraderie, so we would go out and do this together. And this was pretty early on, long before plein air became, kind of an industry, kind of a, whatever you would call it, like a, something that is embraced by towns that have plein air events and all of the sort of trappings of that. Chris and I were going out and doing this before all of that happened, and a lot of times people, stopped along the side of the road where we were and asked us what the heck we were doing, you know. But it was a wonderful, wonderful thing to discover, and I will be forever grateful to him for introducing it to me. I love it. It is a very direct connection with nature, and I work exclusively in plein air. I do not like working from photographs, actually. I like being there. And I try to communicate that idea in the work that I do. But it has been a great joy, actually. Although it's left my wife as a widow back home because I'm off running
I
around.
resisted the urge to do it at first, and then we were invited to do plein air painting at Taliesin for the 100th anniversary of Taliesin. And we were invited with a number of local artists to paint there on the grounds, kind of at your own will for 2 months.
It was
And
great.
We got up at the crack of dawn every morning and drove up there and picked our site and got eaten alive by gnats and, you know,
Oh, yeah.
ran away when the tour buses would come because we weren't supposed to get in the way. And, you know, I mean, it was a very fun summer. And I think that's the most concentrated time I've ever spent doing plein air, and I have a few pieces in the show from that time period. And I really appreciate what happens in your mind when you work that way, but John stuck with it, and I've continued into oil painting and now textile art, which is my heart's desire at the moment. And that came about because we moved and had studio space finally for the first time in our lives in our home. And we had it remodeled, and there were 6 months where I couldn't do anything. All my painting stuff was packed up. And so my friend Leslie Nelson, who's here, is a fantastic textile artist, and she got me started with a group of other interested people. And we've been meeting together every single week for the last 6.5 years and exhibiting together and having a wonderful time. So that is another collaboration that I'm super grateful for. But in the meantime, John and I, since he's retired, have been collaborating more and more because it's basically just us. You know, I mean, you can take your work out and try to find people who can give you feedback, but it's just so easy in our home when you're stuck on something to, you know, just go get that other person. And I think both of our appreciations for what the other thinks and the honesty has really grown. And I'm very grateful that I have that relationship with John.
As am I.
Do you want to do slides, or do you
Let's do it. Let's show these guys what we do.
Okay. Am I first?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
Always.
I'm going to go fairly quick. Well, can I get that in writing? All right. Okay, so the first slide is just further examples of some of my watercolors from the 90s. I fell in love with watercolor, and when I first started in my own pursuit of my passion, away from being paid to design brochures and stuff, I was into portraiture, I was into still life, and these are pieces I did because I've always loved lunaria, which is a plant that I've grown in my garden, and loved the way that watercolor could capture the light and the transparency on the pods. It kind of started a series because John's stepmother fell in love with this one, and then everyone in his family had to have one. So each of his brothers and sisters have one of these paintings, and they just kept like, paint me another one, take me another one. So I've been thinking lately of going back to this topic because I really love the way they look. But none of these are here in the show. This is an oil painting of turkeys that I painted for a show I had at the Arboretum. And I'm super into birds as a theme and anything having to do with the natural world. So what I like to do is I like to experience my subjects and learn about them while I work. These two turkeys I was following in Owen Park, I will climb in the bushes and, hang out and like not move at all. And I've had turkeys almost come right up to me. But this one was really wary of me when I was starting to get closer, and it turned and it just looked at me like this. And so I decided compositionally to build the painting around the eye and try to make it feel like there was this connection with me, but maybe not a good one, or like, don't get too close. But when I feel like I see them and I experience their behaviors, I can do a better job as an artist. This series started when I began crocheting random shapes that I had no plan for, and they started piling up, and I didn't know what I was going to do with them, but I ended up thinking of tide pools, where I love to go and walk and fall in the water to try to see them. I mean, it's just an incredible place. So I made these just out of my head. I sewed beads on them. I hand dyed the water and just finally stitched it all together. Then I had to find a plastic box to put it in so that you could see it, somewhat dimensionally. This is in the show here, and it was a super fun project. So I got into thinking about tide pools and the ocean and started a series called The Octopus's Garden. The 3 smaller pieces are part of that. There are 10 of them in the show toward the back of the first floor. And each one is just my imaginings of the ocean, water, what lives in the water, but very abstracted. I'm not trying to tell a literal story about it. So those are super fun for me, and I don't think I'm done with them yet, but I tried to get as many done as I could for this show, so there's 10 of them. These are some other hand-dyed textiles using birds, as I said. These are golden-winged warblers, which are an endangered species. They do live in Wisconsin in the summer. And I dyed the vintage linen with actual leaves. And then these birds nest in kind of like a thicket on the ground. They don't nest up high. And when I looked at the piece of linen, I just thought, oh, I could have golden-winged warblers being little acrobats on the falling leaves because ground cover is their preferred terrain. So that was the genesis of that. I did paint the birds on first, and then I did applique and hand stitching over. And the smaller one in the upper right is a separate piece. It's a hand-dyed, older vintage doily, and then the lower image is just a detail of the bigger piece. This is a sleeping fox that I did, which is outside the door here. And I did this piece because there was a sleeping fox outside my window when we moved into our new house. And I looked down and that's what I saw. And I was just taken with how sweet it was and just lying there in the snow. So in this one, I thought I'd share a detail of the way it was in progress. I had about 25 colors I was working with. It was all just sort of intuitive. And I used a cotton batik as a tone, which I do in a lot of textile work. Like when I painted, I would have a ground color to build my painting off of. So I like to use textiles as ground for the stitched pieces. And in the end, you don't see it, but I think it adds a quality that wouldn't be there if I had just done it on white. And then all the beads are hand sewn on, and that's the little guardian angel above the fox. And, you know, my brother-in-law, who I was close to, died of cancer the week I finished this piece. And so it's very important to me when I look at it to think of him and his life. And I doubt I will ever see it as a separate thing. It was just sort of a coincidence. This is Mr. Blandings. His name is Blandings because that's the kind of turtle he is. And so this is hand-stitched, and it's outside the door, and I can tell you more about it. And then this is my last slide, just a couple more portraits, one of me and one of another warbler.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Thought I was being...
I like to joke with people that, and it's not even that much of a joke, that I work in pastel. You know, they always ask me, what's your medium? And Cindy Quinn works in everything else, basically. And with great verve, I might add. All right, so I have just a number of things to show you that kind of represent the different aspects of what I do out there. I put this and the next slide in to represent the idea of really chronicling history. You know, when you go out, I mean, I think a lot of us here in Wisconsin are aware of the fact that small family farms are disappearing, and that the landscape, the older landscape, is going away. This was a small sort of what would you call it? A feed mill, or a distributing building for feed that was in New Glarus, down sort of at the bottom of the hill in New Glarus, next to their stockyards there, and just. I don't know, really grabbed my attention. I really liked the look of it, and I am very invested in telephone wires. I love telephone wires. I love the way they segment the sky and kind of break the composition into really interesting pieces, and obviously create a lot of movement, in anything that you do. But this certainly had those characteristics to it. And the next one is, which is right out behind the receptionist here, is old buildings. This is actually the back of those old buildings that are along Main Street in Prairie du Sac, in Sauk City, sorry. And this particular building happened to be a place, an old soda company in Sauk City, and I've noticed over time that the building has been sort of renovated and changed and so on and so forth. But I felt that this really captured a sense of what I don't know what small towns, the back alleys of small towns might have been like. Let's see. Oh, yeah, there we go. This represents a real passion of mine, which is doing wetlands. I love working by streams and working in marsh areas and so on and so forth. There is such a fabulous variety of plants, of shapes, colors. It's just this cornucopia of different things that are happening in these areas, and I love this. And like a little anecdote about this is this was done on a bridge, as you can imagine. I was not standing in the stream, but it was on a bridge going over this small stream, and there were giant trucks from a quarry nearby that were rattling back and forth across this bridge, and I had about maybe about 2.5 feet of clearance there. So it's interesting how these various setups can be, to be sure, but well worth it. I love doing these things. And this is a slide of the house. This is Taliesin, basically, and this is from that summer, that centennial summer, that we had 2 months to work on the grounds of Taliesin, which was an amazing opportunity. So we were there virtually every day doing this. And the one thing that they told us, we could work anywhere on the grounds. We couldn't work inside, and we couldn't get in the way of tourist buses. And so, or the tourists themselves. So we would get there early in the morning and set up right at the house, which is where tourists go, and paint. And then we'd see a bus coming up, the road, this road, and we would break down everything we had and race to the car and get out of their way. So it took I'd say it took the better part of a week to do this painting. Typically, I do paintings in, I don't know, maybe 2 sessions, sometimes 3 sessions of 3 to 4 hours. But this one took a lot longer because we had just a limited amount of time. But this was such an amazing view. And I titled this Raison d'etre. This was really what Wright had in mind, when he built this place. It was incredible. And this is representative of the neighborhood we used to live in. Before we moved to our new house that Cindy was referencing, we lived down off of Monroe Street, and both of these are images from Wingra Park, basically a very, very small park on Lake Wingra. The one on the left is behind the boathouse in the fall, and the one on the right is clearly a dead tree. But there was this amazing effect that was happening between the shadow of the tree on the algae and the tree itself. And as an example of things that come and go, this is now a tree that is really not there anymore. So it was nice to take advantage of that opportunity. But the two of us, speaking of collaborations, did a show years ago of our neighborhood, of the near West Side, and when I went around to all the sort of natural areas that I could find, because this is the venue that I love. And Cindy did studies of some of the neighborhoods, some of the houses and so on and so forth. But we had a show at Edgewood College, actually, and it was a great collaboration, actually. And of course, she thought of it. Okay, and I was following in her footsteps. And this was an image that was near and dear to me. I was out on a road gosh, I think this is Highway J, actually, out sort of in between Black Earth and Mount Horeb and Blue Mounds, I don't know, somewhere in that territory. And it was an October day, like those warm October days that we have just before things chill out, and had, I don't know, just this magical feeling to it. And this is something that I really look for in compositions. I don't just set up an easel and sort of paint, I try not to paint, sort of postcards, if you will. What I try to look for are things that really, really grab me personally and talk to the intimate kind of relationship and feelings that I have when I'm outside. This is the only painting after years and years of painting that I ever did where the animal stood still long enough for me to actually paint it into the painting. I've painted many a pasture and horses, cows, you name it, goats, they all just move out, and never stand still. But this guy stayed, so I love that. And, wrong guy. And that was it, I guess. Okay. So there it is. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Thank you very much. So our last art partners are Theresa Abel and Tim O'Neill. And they are Wisconsin artists who split their time between their gallery, Abel Contemporary, in Stoughton, and their Madison-based studio. Abel works in oil paint, silver point drawings, and gilding, incorporating compositions that blur the lines between modernism and medieval art. Her work tells a story with figures and elaborate patterns, which she draws heavily on from her background growing up in the Catholic Church, as well as her strong interest in art history, particularly the medieval Italian paintings. Tim O'Neill creates one-of-a-kind furniture pieces with elevated level of craftsmanship blended with refined modern design, which he combines with solid woods and highly figured veneers. O'Neill's interest in anthropology and archaeology has led to his research in historical artwork of the Mayan culture, African textiles, as well as Chinese sculpture and enamel work. Please join me in welcoming Theresa Abel and Tim O'Neill.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Promega, Daniel, Tim, and Stephanie for putting this show together. I'm really honored to be with my other couples here to talk about our lives. And so I wanted to start, I'll talk a little bit about my work, and then Theresa will talk about hers, and then we'll talk about this little project that we've had going on since 2004. Just a tiny little project. So let's see what we're doing here. Sorry, I got some notes here. I didn't start making art until I was 32 years old, so I came a little late. I had a background in interior design. The one thing that pushed me out of it and into furniture is that I really didn't like the furniture that was out there, and I thought maybe I could do better. I mean, that's maybe high aspirations, but my own way, I think I did a really good job of creating these very functional and beautiful objects. I was lucky enough to have the teaching of two really wonderful furniture artists. One is Richard Judd, who was my main mentor. He had a furniture studio out in Paoli, Wisconsin, and he brought me on with virtually no experience whatsoever in woodworking. I showed him my design portfolio. He knew that I had a good design sensibility, and he took me on right there, then and there. And I was a little weary because I said, Richard, I have no skills. And he goes, well, I can teach you woodworking. And he did. And we were toe-to-toe for like 7 years, learning the skills and then handing me drawings, and I would just go ahead and build them. So it was a really, really fine relationship, and he's a really dear man. The other person is Ron DeCoke, who I started working with him very, very soon after I met Richard. He was also a furniture maker based out of Basco, Wisconsin, which is a mile from Paoli, and is a very curious fellow. If I first met him, I was looking for an apartment to move out to that area so that I could be closer to work and so forth. And Richard told me to go see Ron, so I went and saw Ron, and I said, "Do you have any apartments?" He had this 3 buildings with apartments in it, and he said, "Well, I'm all booked with apartments." He said, "But, we could build an apartment." And I said, "Well, how do you build an apartment?" And he said, "Well, my shop's pretty big. We could take off the back half, and beyond that wall, there's a room, and beyond there's another room, and we could kind of chop it up and rearrange it." And I thought, well, this is a good guy to be with here. It's very artistic. So he actually, I learned some really good skills from him as well, not only furniture maker, but how to build buildings. And that came into effect later on in my years. And so that was a really important thing to have is those 2 mentors to help me understand how to make objects and be very highly skilled and thoughtful about how you do the process. They both had their varying process. They were kind of polar as far as their processes that they used and their workmanship. Richard was very anal and very perfectionist, where Ron was, the best way to describe him as one of the character of Pigpen. That you'd see him walk with this cloud, and I remember when I first walked in to meet him in his studio, he had pathways going to his machines, and there was sawdust this deep that he wore through to get to all of his machines. So again, this is a really fascinating guy to me, and he's a very dear friend of mine, and I really love him very much. Coming to my own aesthetics, Tim said earlier, I'm really interested in ancient cultures. From a young boy, I really was fascinated by Egyptian work and in both their hieroglyphics and their artifacts and the objects that they were making about their culture and how they functioned in society. And from there, I went to Asian countries and looked at some of their work, and back to Africa and looked at textiles and sculptural elements. And then finally, I came upon the Mayan culture, and I was really fascinated by them. In their own right, they had these hieroglyphics that they were using to depict their everyday life and how they functioned. And at the time, when I started doing some of my work, imagery, symbolism, I think the archaeologists knew about 20-25% of what they were saying with their hieroglyphics. And to me, that was really fascinating to have that unknown out there. I didn't really want to know that complete picture because I wanted to kind of fabricate it in my mind. So with that, I just started developing my own hieroglyphics that no one would be able to understand except me. And I really like that. So I just continued on with that. So and I'll show you some images of what that means a little later. My work, to me, I always wanted it to be functional. I'm really tied into function. I want people to own the pieces, and I want them to use the pieces. I really want them to become their own antiques in the future. So I'm really put a lot of care in making. I'm a highly skilled craftsperson. Richard taught me a couple different methods. One was veneering, how to veneer a base product, which is a 32nd of an inch thick wood slice. And there's a whole process that you have to get into to do it properly. So he taught me that. And Ron, he also uses veneer, but he doesn't glue it to a substrate. He glues it together in different colors and makes patterns and then puts it onto a piece. So it's 2 different methods. I kind of consider that I'm in between those 2 guys. I didn't want to be the extreme, so I kind of focused in on my own work that way. So a lot of my work is commission work. I have been in the furniture business for almost 30 years. I started in May, it'll be 30 years. At the same time, that same year, I met Theresa. So art brought us together in a way which is too complicated to get into right now, but maybe later. All of my work is kind of a combination of these different cultural symbolisms, and also I bring in minimalism, which is just simple forms. I like the formality of volume and negative, positive space, line quality, and those are what interests me. And then the end thing is that the wood itself, the material, I'm captivated by it. It's whether it's solid wood or veneers, it's incredible the amount of figure and depth that you can get from a piece of wood. So this first piece was in honor of Brancusi. Constantine Brancusi was one of my favorite artists. He still is. And you can see it in the leg form here. Along with a big box that's cherry, and then Macassar ebony, which is my favorite wood. It's made in Asia, or it's grown in Asia, rather. Usually they cut it up into veneers because they get more volume out of it. I did a series of totems. This one happens to be on the wall. Most of them were floor standing. I also have brought in some of my work, the idea of burning wood. And I like the contrast between a burnt surface and these highly finished woods and veneers. I also have done a lot of inlays and marquetry. That's another technique that Richard taught me. This piece was a commission. It was, at the time, it was my biggest commission I ever had. It's about a 5-foot tall jewelry cabinet. So this woman had a lot of jewelry. And they came to me and said, I have really a lot of jewelry. And as I saw her collection, I thought, well, I'm going to have to really do a job here. And so there's like 24 little tiny drawers that pull out, and the door had to have a secret lock on it. And then the bottom big drawers are for bigger pieces that we couldn't fit into the little drawers. So, and those were all locking. So it has this kind of stylized form to it. But it's sitting on a base that has all those carvings that I've talked about with the burning, and it has kind of an aged quality. That's what I like about the carving that I do. It puts me back into that time frame of ancient history. This is an example of using more of that textural carving. A lot of my work from the beginning, I wanted it more to be sculptural in fact. I just didn't want some plain object. I wanted to have more sculptural involved. And then that actually took me into start to make sculpture. So this is a big tower. It's about 7 feet tall. And perched on top of it is a bronze crow that I modeled. We didn't really talk about some of the other things I do. My work job during the day, I work at the UW in the art department, and I'm a 3D technician, and I work in sculpture, glass, and digital fabrication. So it's kind of a broad spectrum of what I have to do there. I do work with students a lot, and I like that the most out of my job. The other thing I like is that I can use any of the equipment in the art department. And I take advantage of the foundry. So I help teach foundry there. And so this is a bronze crow. It's life size. This piece was really interesting to me because the symbols that I put together are of this language, this past language, with the unknown. And one of my favorite animals in this world are crows. They're highly intelligent. They have a language. They understand that language. They pass it on to their offspring. And they're always in the background. You know, they're always up there on a wire, right, John? And I love their call. It's so beautiful to me. And this is captured mid-caw. So, and then getting back into some of the furniture I make. Now, on that screen, it looks like there are no 90-degree angles. There are. It's just this distortion. It's a matter of, with this piece, it's all pretty much veneers, just a different combination of veneers. And I had some material that was introduced to me. It comes off of architectural panels. And that's the kind of wavy little blue box right there. And I wanted to emphasize that and put a little color in the piece. This was another commission called this canoe bench. Made a couple of these. So this is bending wood over a form and then putting those two bent areas together. It's also incorporating some steel work. This is another piece where I'm using a lot of bent wood. So it's stacked up, bending plywood, glued together, veneered on all sides. I've done this piece also with a carved base on it, which is really interesting. This has more of an Art Deco influence to it. This is a piece I made for a client. He had 4 of my pieces that I kind of worked a room around it, starting with that big bench. This again goes back to using the Macassar ebony veneer. It's more of a kind of a linear piece. This is a fairly recent piece I did. It's a coffee table. Some really nice friends and patrons of the gallery that I've been working with for the last 7 years, I think. But just big sculptural piece. The black is solid mahogany, which is about 9 inches thick. That's stacked up and carved into it. A few years ago, I was approached by a woman from the Judith Hochburn Student Center on campus, and I was shortlisted to make some furniture for them. They had just built their new building, and they needed 3 arcs throughout the building. So I got the commission of making 2 of their arcs, a reading table and a podium. So I took it as a challenge. I'm not religious at all. I grew up Catholic. So there's a little problem there, but the rabbis really like me. But I work with symbolism, and the Jewish faith is steeped in symbolism. And so with a little research and understanding, I started to develop this kind of imagery that I thought they would really like. And this is called the Mount Sinai Ark. So it's the idea of Moses going up to the mountain to receive the word of the Lord. And you can see the ramp effect that you would go up the mountain, and then the diagonal line of the door takes you up into heaven. And the 5 poles are the 5 books. This is the second one, and this was more developed after the actual building itself. It had a lot of glass, steel. It had Jerusalem stone, which is this light pale stone. I didn't really want to use that because I wouldn't be able to lift it. So the anagray, which is a really highly figured curly wood, I used as the main body of the piece. Now both these arcs open up. They're lit in the inside. They're upholstered on the inside. It's for the Torahs to be kept sacred. And they're all on wheels because they have a very mobile facility there, and they needed to move things in and out of position. From that large commission, a few years later, I got another commission. A rabbi had been visiting the UW and saw my work, and they were just doing a capital fundraising for some new work done in their synagogue. So I actually, these are some working images. So this is half of it on my workbench, and some of the symbolism, the doors are these big panels right here. So you pull those out, representing the tablets. Up on top, you have the Star of David, and I was really looking at that symbolically and what it represents. And if you take apart that star, there's 12 sides to it. So then I think about the tribes that are out there wandering, right? And so I've split it all up and kind of pushed it out there. And so you have to kind of take each one of those little darts and put them together in your mind to form that star. And they really love that symbolism that I created for them. The cabinet sits on 4 big columns, which is representative of their building. They had a beautiful building in Brooklyn that had these huge, huge columns, so I wanted to bring that into the piece as well. Then I started getting into live edge furniture, reminiscent of mid-century furniture. I was kind of captivated by these boards that I started to see in slab form. Basically, it's a cut section of a tree that has both the live edge on it from where the bark was, and then the internal heartwood. So I'm just going to zip through there. Same thing, this is curly walnut on the top. The door is tamo, which is Japanese ash. And then I do have another media that I do work in. In '97, I went back to school to study art metals. And I had the fortune of being in the studio with Fred Fenster and Lisa Gralnick, two of the, I think, the best metalsmiths in this country right now. My body of work for my MFA program was based on this relationship of food and jewelry and this very long history of that. And it also, with the jewelry, when I started getting into that, it was really more of a commentary on our culture and how we see things and the injustice in our culture for the most part. These are based on the 2008-2009 financial crisis. I made 5 rings. They're all kind of these cliched little statements, but they formulate this idea of what we all went through. Pyramid scheme via Bernie Madoff. So that's an actual dollar bill cut out. It's all fabricated sterling. The Let Them Eat Cake was food stamps that was fabricated sterling, and then those are actual food stamps that I attached to it. In God We Trust, same thing, a gold crucifix with that money wedge in there, a kind of what's important, our religion or our money, you know. Another one, this is Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? It's a 1931 Mercury dime, which is the year that Yip Harburg wrote the song, Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? And I thought it'd kind of bring it full circle. You know, they had just gone over the Great Depression of 29, and here it's 31, and so I've got all these big stacks of money that they cart off to the bank, you know. And then this was a house of cards, which I have a weird penchant of saving all my credit cards, and I said, I got to do something with these someday, so I made a little credit card house. So with that, Theresa will take over.
All right.
Thank you.
Hi. So for the past 3 decades, my paintings have referenced Italian medieval work and Russian iconography. I grew up in a small town in west central Wisconsin. There was no art in the house where I grew up. It was a very strict Catholic household, and the only art that I came into contact with was liturgical art in the church. My parents did buy a set of encyclopedias when I was a kid, which were about the only books we had in the house, and I loved to read, so I read them all of the time, and I was enamored with the section on art history, and I loved the color plates of the artists. So when I was old enough to go to the public library by myself, I started to read books about the lives of artists and decided at a pretty early age that I wanted to be an artist, and I knew specifically that I wanted to be a painter, which I think is sort of interesting. I did go to college and studied art, and interestingly enough, I'm just showing you different pictures of my work. When I was in college, I was completely enamored by really big, bold, kind of abstract work, rough figurative work. I loved Francis Bacon and Alice Neal. I loved the work of Leon Golub and Rothko and, you know, Hans Hofmann. And I really thought that that's what I wanted to do. And I tried to do that really, really hard, and it just wasn't kind of working for me. Luckily, I went to study abroad in Florence, Italy, my junior year. And when I was there, I just kind of went for the experience, but all of the art that was there really hit me. And it's really where I feel like I learned how to paint. And I learned some traditional methods, including gilding, which has been in my practice ever since. We had to do figurative work, 8 hours a day, and it was really terrific. And when I came back, it completely changed the way that I was working. And so I think as an artist, you know, one of the most important things early on is finding out what your real nature is and what your voice is. And once I figured out, as much as I romanticized this notion of painting in some studio and painting with a lot of brushes and whipping all this paint around, I felt much more comfortable painting really tight and making little teeny patterns. And so that was really important. What was also important after I graduated was I met Tim shortly after that. And although you've just seen his work and our work doesn't have anything to do with the others, we have a constant dialogue, like I think all of the artists here would talk about, where you're always talking about your work and helping each other work through things. And sometimes your toughest critic. But Tim doing the fine craft that he did, I got to meet lots of people in the fine crafts, and not only is that important because their work is in our gallery, but it helped me realize that as a painter, crafting my work and really caring about my material was incredibly important. So in this last painting, that's myself, Tim, and our friend Kelly Hauptman. And then this is a piece that Tim posed for as well.
I don't wear briefs like that.
He doesn't. And this is another painting where I started to do some drawing, and it's graphite and oil and gold leaf. And then this is an object, and if you know Tim likes to go to antique stores and yard sales and junk shops, and he'll pick up any sort of beautiful objects. And he brought home these sort of old kettles and said, I think you'd like these. Are you interested in these? And I started to paint on them. And they ended up being this really interesting project where I started to paint on three-dimensional objects. And what I really like is all of my work is really interested in reiterating the picture plane. It's all about really flattening things. And this was this real push and pull between what was three-dimensional and what was two-dimensional. And I found that incredibly fascinating. This is the other side of that teapot. And then this is one other object that I did. It's called transubstantiation. And when I found this casserole, it was probably some junky casserole at Goodwill. It was porcelain, mass-produced, and had little orange flowers painted on it. And I think that object probably, the form of it originated from some once beautiful piece of porcelain created in England or Russia or something, and it had been watered down and sort of bastardized into a really not very attractive object anymore. And I loved the idea of making it one of a kind and beautiful again. And it's called transubstantiation. If you weren't raised Catholic, that's from the sacrament of communion. They call it transubstantiation when the bread and the wine are supposed to literally turn into the body and blood of Christ. I started to do more drawing in my work, but graphite sort of smears and smudges, and it's really hard to work with if you're doing oil painting because the solvents will sort of smear it around. You can't really varnish it. And so a good friend of mine suggested that I use another old technique called silver point drawing, and it's really just drawing with a silver wire. And what I like about that is it doesn't move around. You can't make mistakes, but on a prepared panel, you're really just drawing with a wire, and you're depositing sterling silver or fine silver on the panel. And it actually, you can create a really, really detailed, fine look, and it tarnishes a little bit, so it kind of warms up. This is another piece. These are actually quite small paintings, and so the work is really, the faces are probably about this big. So they're very detailed. And then I've always been obsessed with the pattern making. So in this piece, which is actually a really large silver point, which is in the show behind the reception desk, I just wanted to do a piece that was just all of the pattern and no figurative. Well, there's a couple of hands in there, but no faces. And being silver point and how long it took, I was working on other pieces, but this took about 3 years to make. So, the main themes in my work have always been about religion, questioning organized religion. I'm interested in ideas of mortality and how, as humans, when many of us are raised in different religions, and we're aware of our mortality, how does that influence how does that influence our morality? So that's what I think about all of the time. And recently I've been very interested in the relationship between art and religion. So this is what I'm currently working on in my studio. And I've been thinking a lot about, when I was 18 and I left the Catholic Church, I thought I was leaving it for something else. And recently it's dawned on me that art is its own kind of religion. And, art used to go to these beautiful churches. The churches, synagogues, temples always hired the best architects and the best artists to fill their places with the most wonderful artwork. And now it all goes to museums. So, if it's the Guggenheim or the Getty, the most beautiful buildings are museums, and the most beautiful art ends up housed in those buildings. And we treat them with reverence, and we almost talk about artists as if they're saints of a sort. So that's what I'm fascinated with recently. And then just really quickly, because I know this is going on for a long time, Tim and I, our greatest collaboration together has been our art gallery, and I'm going to let Tim talk again, and we'll be brief.
Yes. 2004, Theresa came to me and said, hey, I think we should buy the gallery, the owners of the Artisan Gallery in Pale. I wanted to kind of retire. And I said, well, you put up with me for 6 years of undergrad and grad school, so I guess I can put up with your gallery. So we went together on it, and wholeheartedly we went together on it. And being from a fine craft background, I wanted to elevate what that gallery has been to a higher level. And I think Theresa was of the same mind. So we consistently worked on that, getting better artists and better artists. And the time came that we lost our lease, our long-term lease. And this was about 2 years ago. They, said they weren't going to renew our lease except for 1 year, and that wasn't going to be enough time for us to find a building and move everything. So we did, actually. We hustled, and Theresa did find this building in Stoughton, which is on the main street. It's an old tobacco warehouse from 1891. It had seen many different lives. The most recent, when we saw it, was an antique mall. So there, a basement and 2 floors. All 3 floors were stacked with antiques and tchotchkes. And so we took a big, deep breath because we could see that that had a really wonderful skeleton, as you can see right here. And we, went ahead and bought the building and just started gutting it. And we had a lot of sweat equity, as they say, involved. We had so many volunteers that helped us on this project that it was unbelievable. Some of them are right here, yeah. Right there, too. Amy even cut my lawn because I couldn't cut, I was so busy. She came and cut my lawn. Thank you. So this is me working on a job that I thought was going to take a day, but it put me back about 4 days. So there's rotted wood and so forth. And that's Theresa in her other work clothes, right? You say anything else? There we go.
So this is, so we have this beautiful building, and it was incredibly stressful and one of the most intense things we ever did. But, the thing that I'll say is we work well together, and we do when we talk about our art, and we help each other, and we always champion each other and hold each other up. And we renovated an enormous building, and we did not argue. It's kind of amazing. And we created this great thing, and we always kind of share the same aesthetics, and it turned out great.
And one more thing to add is, this was one of my biggest challenges in my life, but and there are times where I wanted to walk away from it, and Theresa would bolster me. And there are times that she just wanted to walk and go home and not come back. And, and I supported her. We're doing the right thing. The last thing that we did is, the first and second floor, as you can see, are more than enough space for us as a gallery. The basement we decided to turn into artist studios because there's a dearth of studio space in Madison area for sure. And if there are, they're very pricey. And so we decided, let's give back to those emerging artists so that they can get a foothold and start their career. And we both felt that was very important. And so we've got 3 of them rented, and we have 3 more available if you know of anyone. But it was a great project.
Well, thanks, everybody. And I found my prop. And timing is everything, but this was my best Barry Goldwater. Thanks. So anyway, there's a long line at the restrooms, so you might want to go out there and get something to drink, and we're going to have a photo session here before the rest of us and the artists go out there. So thank you for coming, and we'll see you out there.
And I'm one of a pair of people. There's 3 pairs. My wife is Annette Hansen. I make prints and paintings, and she makes photographs and ceramics. There are 2 other couples that are in the show, 6 of us total. And we've taken over the Promega art galleries, both upstairs and downstairs, all the hallways. There's easily over 100 pieces of art hanging tonight, and I think it goes for 3 months through June. She's a much better gardener, she's a way better cook, and she's a much better human being. I make my living as an artist, and she's someone who has come to it. Hobbyist is a terrible way of putting it because it's also her passion, but she does a lot of different things to pay the bills, as do I. But I've been a master printer at Tandem Press for 27 years, and now I teach printmaking, so I'm kind of literally involved in the arts almost on a daily basis. So that's how I'm going to judge my answer there. Ages and ages ago, I think my mom took me to art classes, and I wasn't very mathematically inclined. And I found that I had a passion for making things. My dad was also, he was a house painter who also was a part-time craftsman. We had tools and table saws. And the idea of making things was really a pretty cool thing. I'm lazy. She's inspired. And for example, in being invited into this couples show, she has made art in the past, but it's been a long time. And she just turned it on over the last couple months. Going through her archives, picking out all the photographs. She's been lately, last 2 years, really involved in doing ceramics, and she really just turned it on.
I'm actually one of her harshest critics, I think, because I want her to succeed. And if I see something that she's missing, because a lot of times you're really focused in on a piece and you can't step back from it. And sometimes I come in and I can see the whole piece where she's focusing on, bits and pieces of it. And I think that's very beneficial to both of us. We both do that to each other. So.
Yeah. And because we're honest, then we really trust each other. And we do it in a kind way,
Yeah.
And it's almost always true. That's the other thing.
It is, yeah.
We're now open in Stoughton, Wisconsin, which has been a really wonderful, welcoming community. We're at 524 East Main Street, so it's down by the railroad tracks, not far from the Opera House. The important thing to know about the gallery is that we represent about 100 artists from across the United States. We represent artists in all media, which I think was reflected in the talk that we just did, Tim being in the quote-unquote fine craft world and I'm in the fine art world. When we started the gallery, it was really important that we show fine art and fine craft at the same level because they're equally exciting and interesting areas in the arts. And so we're particularly well known in ceramics, and we have phenomenal painters as well. And then upstairs, Tim had the idea to create a space called Number 5.
Number 5 is basically an alternative space that's more commercially, not commercially viable. So it's installation work, it's video work. It's just work that's kind of pushing the envelope of what art is and what people consider art to be. We thought it was really important to educate our client base and to inform them what is out there in the big world. And this isn't usually done in gallery settings. It's usually done in museums or art centers or that type of venue. So we really liked that we could bring that all together in one space.
The art that I create on a regular basis that I show in the Abel gallery is plein air landscapes. And I love to do them. I love to go out outside. I joke with friends that to get a painting from my efforts is kind of a sideline from just simply being outside, being in the elements. It's a wonderful, wonderful feeling. It's transformative. It is transcendental. It is meditative. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing to participate in. So Chris and I did this together. We, my friend and colleague, we went out to all sorts of areas in western Dane County, south into Greene County, all over the place. We were just, kind of nomads out there, finding great compositions as we drove through the countryside and stopping, setting up on the side of the road and doing paintings. And I just became addicted to that, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful couple of decades of working outside. No, I don't think we are competitive because she often works in many different mediums and in different ways. Working more recently on natural subjects, teaching nature journaling, and really getting into the natural world, like doing a lot of studying about the subjects that she's painting and so on and so forth. My aspect is to go out to find really interesting compositional ideas, very intimate environments that I just kind of immerse myself into, and they have the paintings that I do have a very personal significance to me in that regard. We are very honest with each other. We have such an appreciation for the objectivity of the other person, being able to see the work with fresh eyes, and yet with a background, a very deep background in different media, in everything artistic, so that we really trust each other's feedback, and I think we benefit tremendously from it.